Hi, I'm Jessica Gregory, and this is my EcoBuzz. You're in luck because we're about to finish the mini-series we've been covering on where our water goes. That's right, today we're talking about wastewater, which is water that comes from homes and businesses.
Think about the water you use in your home every day. There's excess water that drains down your sinks and showers, dishwashers, and washing machines. Then there's the water and other stuff that gets flushed down the toilet. As you might imagine, water flowing from these different uses will also contain differing levels of solids, chemicals, bacteria, and other substances that could be harmful in an ecosystem.
Hopefully, after what we've learned so far about where our water comes from and the way that watersheds work, you can see how problematic it would be if this wastewater were released directly back into the environment. Thankfully, today, wastewater is systematically collected and treated, but that wasn't always the case. In fact, during the 1960s, Grand Rapids alone dumped as much as 12.6 billion gallons of raw, untreated sewage into the Grand River every year. Ugh, can you imagine?
Part of the problem was the way city water and sewer pipelines were set up. Many of them were designed to transport a combination of sewage and stormwater, but often after a heavy rain or flooding event, untreated sewage would overflow into these combined systems, after which it would get discharged directly into area waterways. These systems were called combined sewer overflows, or CSOs.
Thankfully, in Grand Rapids, these systems have been reconfigured so that overflow is no longer a major concern. But making sure our wastewater is treated properly is still super important. So how does the water get treated? What processes are used? And is the treated water safe for reentry back into natural communities? I recently had the opportunity to tour the wastewater facility in Grand Rapids, and I saw firsthand how this process works. Since I'm guessing you're a little curious too, let's go take a look.
The Water Resources Recovery Facility sits on 50 acres just south and downstream of downtown Grand Rapids, and it processes an average of 40 million gallons of storm and wastewater per day. Most of this water comes from homes and businesses, and some is also collected from storm drains throughout the city.
In the city, when water exits your home, it flows through a system of pipes using gravity. In a place like Grand Rapids, where hills are often an issue, pump stations are strategically placed to help keep the water and solids flowing so they don't clog up the pipes.
Once the water reaches the plant, it enters the headworks building, or the intake, where large solids, grit, and paper are removed.
This is a good place to mention that flushable wipes and feminine products should not be flushed down the toilet or drain. They don't decompose naturally, and they can cause serious issues by clogging up the intake screens at this point in the treatment process.
Grease and fats from cooking are another issue as they clog pipes and prevent water flow, so make sure to collect as much of these as possible and put them in the trash can, instead of rinsing them down the drain. Next are the primary settling tanks where water moves slowly to allow smaller solids to settle out. Oils, fats, grease, and other particles float to the top. They're called scum and are scraped off and separated from the water. Settled solids are called sludge or biosolids and are scraped off the bottom of the primary tanks, then separated from the water in a process called dewatering. Biosolids can then be used for fertilizers, compost, or are taken to the landfill.
After the primaries, the wastewater travels to secondary treatment tanks where microorganisms like bacteria and protozoa are introduced.
These organisms are also naturally present and are used to help break down solids and pollutants in the water. Since oxygen is needed for this process, pipelines supply oxygen to the microbes via aeration basins, where lots of bubbling happens.
The concentrations of microbes and oxygen are carefully regulated, and microbes can be recycled and used again and again. Microbes are also utilized at this facility in Grand Rapids to harness the energy produced through the decomposition of solids from the wastewater.
While some solids are hauled away, others are transported to huge digester tanks where the microbes are supplied with nutrients and heat so they can happily perform decomposition. The gases they release are harnessed to produce clean energy. After secondary treatment using microbes, the water is fed into the final aerators, which are large circular tanks. Again, water moves slowly so any remaining solids can settle out, and floating particles are scraped off the top.
At this point, microbes are recycled and returned back to the secondary treatment tanks. They're transported via a really cool machine called an Archimedes screw. The water at this point looks pretty clear, but it's still not quite ready to leave the facility. There are still some microbes present, which aren't safe for human contact at high concentrations. So, the water is exposed to bright UV light, which alters microbial DNA and prevents them from causing harm to other living things.
After being aerated one final time, because, oxygen is good for living things, the water is released from the plant through the outfall site into the Grand River. Throughout the entire process, about 95% of the waste has been removed from the water. What remains can provide beneficial nutrients to the river ecosystem.
Once that water is back in the Grand River, it flows out to Lake Michigan, where some may be recollected and filtered again for use as drinking water by the Lake Michigan Water Filtration Plant. We talked about it in episode 1. For more information and a more detailed video on how our wastewater is treated after use, visit www.grandrapidsmi.gov. Thanks for joining me on this little adventure to learn about where our water goes. In upcoming episodes, we'll explore the importance of frozen water and ways that some local students are being proactive to care for our water resources. Until next time, happy naturing.